A warning that more computers could be affected by the unprecedented global cyber attack as the working week begins. Already there are 200,000 victims in 150 countries, with an international effort to try and identify the hackers. 7 NHS trusts in England and 11 boards in Scotland are still affected, with patients told to expect further disruption. As Labour calls on the government to act urgently on cyber security, we'll have the latest. Also tonight, Emmanuel Macron is sworn in as France's youngest president, promising to rejuvenate the country. Wages versus inflation, with earnings set to be an election issue, we reality check the numbers on pay. A victory for Lewis Hamilton at the Spanish Grand Prix. And
the BAFTA goes to the magnificent Sarah Lancashire.
a winning night for Happy Valley as its star takes the Lead Actress Award. Good evening. More computers are likely to be affected tomorrow by the cyber attack that hit many parts of the NHS as the working week begins and people return to their desks. The ransomware attack is now known to have had 200,000 victims around the world, with Europe's law enforcement agency saying that new versions are being released and an international manhunt underway for those responsible. With some NHS trusts and boards still affected, we'll hear from our health editor in a moment. But first, our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
A cyber attack that spread like wildfire around the world and may not yet be over. It was launched on Friday by hackers whose identity is still unknown. And what's been seen so far has already been extraordinary, say law enforcement.
We've never seen anything like this, unprecedented in its scale. The latest numbers that we're seeing, over 200,000 victims in over 150 countries, so clearly a global phenomenon.
This is what victims have been confronted with. A warning they've been locked out of their computer and they will have to pay a ransom to get back in. In Britain, the NHS seems to have been the main victim. In Russia, the Interior Ministry was hit. In France, a car plant had to stop production. And in Germany, train arrivals and departure boards were hacked, leading to a return to chalk and blackboards. This map, created by a researcher who's tracked the virus, shows the spread of infection. What all those affected had in common was that their computers had not been upgraded to eliminate this danger. In America, the FBI and NSA are trying to find those responsible. Here, Britain's Cyber Security Centre, part of GCHQ, says it has not seen a new wave of attacks strike the UK since Friday. But when people turn on their computers tomorrow, the fear is we could see problems on a significant scale because of malicious software which has already spread.
What's likely to happen tomorrow is that organisations that didn't know they were affected on Friday may find that out tomorrow, and organisations that were affected on Friday and over the weekend might find that some of the problems have spread. That's not to say that the attacks are new. It's a repercussion of what happened on Friday.
This is what the first computer looked like. Colossus, built at Bletchley Park to break German codes. Since then, computers have become almost infinitely more powerful, but we've also become much more dependent on them. That means the struggle between those seeking to protect systems and those seeking to exploit or undermine them matters more than ever.
The risks of insecure computer systems have been known about for decades, but it is only in the last few days, with the extraordinary global spread of this new virus, that people are realising what that actually means for all of us. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, out of the original 47 health trusts in England affected by the cyber attack, 7 are still experiencing problems restoring their IT systems, as are 11 Scottish health boards. In some cases, ambulances have been diverted to other hospitals and patients are being warned that there may be disruption to appointments tomorrow. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
It was the biggest ever attack on health service IT networks. Today, staff at those hospitals caught up in the disruption were doing their best to get them up and running, using paper where they had to. Questions are being asked about whether NHS IT security was adequate. Some trusts are still using an outdated and unprotected operating system, Windows XP. Ministers said there had been investment.
We're spending around £50 million on the NHS cyber systems to improve their security. We have encouraged the NHS trusts to reduce their exposure to the weakest system, the Windows XP. Only 5%, less than 5% of the trusts actually use that system anymore.
Yes. York Hospital's computers were affected, but managers say they weren't using the old system and they had invested in security patches to protect against viruses.
We are almost applying patches based on best advice on a weekly basis as supplied by our providers. We're working with biggest brains in the industry. We run a large system. We take our responsibilities really seriously.
Labour has written to the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt calling for a detailed explanation, and today the party went on the attack.
The government's handling of this crisis has been chaotic. We've long warned that the government's attitude to cybersecurity in the NHS was complacent. They've cut the infrastructure budget so that the NHS couldn't put the money it needed into securing its IT systems, and I'm afraid now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Labour says if elected it'll invest billions of pounds in the NHS to upgrade IT systems and modernise hospitals and other buildings. England's largest NHS trust, Barts Health, which includes the Royal London Hospital, was one of those hardest hit by the impact of the cyber attack. The IT systems are still not running normally. Managers say a certain number of appointments and routine operations will go ahead tomorrow. NHS England had this advice for patients.
It may be a little bit slower when you get there because the hospitals are using different systems, and please be patient. But the basic message is, if you have an appointment, you should attend.
But some ambulances are still being diverted. For some hospitals, this unprecedented disruption is not over yet.
And Hugh's with me now in the studio. So, Hugh, after a weekend like this, what should someone do? Someone who has an appointment at one of the affected hospitals or surgeries tomorrow?
Well, Michelle, the advice from NHS leaders in England and Scotland is if you've got an appointment for tomorrow or planned surgery and you haven't heard to the contrary, go along. Now, perhaps remarkably, some of the hospitals worst affected are still saying, go along, we think we can go ahead with your appointment. They've managed to sort things out with backup records. Slightly confusingly, at least one hospital has put out a slightly different message in its area saying go online and check or phone in, and that might cause a little bit of confusion. Then you've got all the GP practices caught up in all this. Their systems were shut down on Friday. What'll happen when they try and open them up again tomorrow morning? And they're saying come along to your appointment, but at least one practice has told patients we won't be able to get hold of your records, so there may not be much point you coming along, and they may have booked online and that appointment might not show up. So I think it'll be a pretty difficult day for the NHS. It's come a long way since all this emerged on Friday, but you've got a backlog of procedures cancelled then, and I think the whole effect of this may be felt for a little while to come.
Hugh Pym, thank you. Emmanuel Macron was sworn in today as France's youngest president, promising in his inaugural address to restore his country's global standing. He said France has to find answers to the great crises of the time, including migration, terrorism and climate change. Our Europe correspondent Damon Grammaticus was watching.
Not since France had an emperor 200 years ago has it had a leader this young. Just 39 years old, inaugurated president today. Emmanuel Macron. He's got here thanks to self-confidence and some political good fortune. The disillusion that's fueled populism elsewhere has led France to back a newcomer, but from the liberal centre. He only formed his political movement last year. His predecessor, François Hollande, leaves office as France's most unpopular leader of modern times. But the task in front of Mr. Macron is huge if he's to bring about the renaissance he's pledged.
All labour laws will be liberalised, companies will be supported, initiative encouraged. Innovation and creativity will be at the heart of my programme. The French feel left behind by globalisation will be better protected.
To achieve all that, Mr Macron needs a majority in Parliament. His party has no MPs and elections are in just 4 weeks. Emmanuel Macron has promised that this moment will mark a decisive break from the past for France, a moment of national renewal. But all his predecessors have promised reform and failed to deliver. He'll need more than youthful optimism and energy to succeed. What he hopes is that by reinvigorating France, he can make it a force once again at the heart of the EU.
Le président Macron va relancer l'Europe avec Madame Merkel.
President Macron will relaunch the EU along with Madame Merkel. If the British were still members, they'd be part of this, but we'll do it without them this time. It will be on the basis that countries which want to cooperate further will.
So for France and for Europe, much now rests on some very young shoulders. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Paris.
Labour has defended its promise to raise billions of pounds for public services with a new tax on financial transactions if it wins the election. Under plans for a so-called Robin Hood tax, stamp duty currently paid on the sale of shares would be extended to cover other types of trading in the City of London. The Conservatives are promising to build a new generation of social housing in England if they win on June the 8th, but admitted there's no new funding for the plan. The party says it expects thousands of homes to be built each year over the course of the next Parliament, paid for from the £1.4 billion already set aside for infrastructure. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has admitted that literacy and numeracy have got worse in Scottish schools. A survey last week showed less than half of 13 and 14-year-old pupils were performing well in writing. Ms Sturgeon told the Andrew Marr Show that action is being taken to address the issues.
We have identified a particular issue with literacy and numeracy, and we also are determined to accelerate the progress in closing the attainment gap. So we have a massive programme of reform underway right now to do that.
The Royal College of Nursing is warning of a summer of protests unless the government drops its 1% cap on pay for nurses. It says the cap has caused a significant real terms pay cut for nurses. The Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has said that households will be squeezed as wages fail to keep up with rising prices. As part of our reality check series on key issues in the run-up to the election, tonight Steph McGovern examines what's happened to pay.
Whether you think the politicians are spinning you a yarn or not, the key issues being debated are really important to lots of people, not least how much we're being paid. Now, if you look back over the last decade, average wages in real terms have been falling. In other words, the cost of living has been going up faster than pay, and that means we've been facing a pay cut.
Even though we've seen wages start to go up over the last few years, there's a lot of catching up to do. Before the financial crisis, average weekly earnings, when you take into account inflation, were £476. Now they're down to £467.
Well, by their very nature, these figures are averages, so therefore they vary, of course, depending on what you do and where you live. But have a look at this map, because it shows the regional differences in terms of how much people are earning, the darker areas being where people on average are earning more. And Paul's been doing research on this. Come on in, Paul, and just explain, why are there these differences?
So if we look at patterns of investment across the country, the darker areas are tended to attract in more high-skilled type jobs, IT, smartphone app development, cinema special effects, high-paid type jobs. Whereas further north, those lighter areas tend to have been jobs that are attracted in, being call centres, low-skill type manufacturing, and actually cheaper places to do business too. That means you're seeing very different patterns of investment, but also then different types of jobs and different wages as a result.
I'm going to leave it to clean that up. While pay has suffered, employment has actually risen, and there's more people in work than ever before. But people are working much more flexibly now, and one of the controversial areas is 0 hours contracts. So this is where you've definitely got a job, but you're just not guaranteed any hours, which can of course put pressure on people's pay and on living standards. Dan, this is something you've been looking at, isn't it?
Yeah, so the pay squeeze that we're set to experience this year is coming on the back of really significant falls in real wages that we saw in the wake of the financial crisis. So taken together, that means that sadly this decade looks like it's going to be the worst on record for rising pay packets in 200 years.
So people feeling the squeeze. Dan, thank you very much. So why can't employers just pay people more money? Well, we've got Andy here, who's a local businessman, also from the Mid-Yorkshire Chambers of Commerce. Andy, why can't you pay people more?
In truth, we'd like to pay more, but it's about sustainability stuff. If we pay too much, then clearly our costs will be too much and we become unattractive to our customers, and we've got to get the balance right.
So that's what businesses think. Thanks very much, Andy. But what does everyone else out there think about their pay at the moment?
I do think it's really important that people are rewarded fairly for what they do and what they contribute, and also that they've got enough to live on, because things are hard for people.
It'd be easier if they weren't paying people at the top so much. They'd have money then to pay extra people wages, probably expand the business enough to be able to take on extra people.
It's just striking a balance of something that I can live off as well as have some money to put on the side with having a good job as well. I can't be working 5 jobs a day just to make, living wage.
At the moment, inflation and wage increases are following a similar pattern. But if you're working in the public sector, you'll be feeling the squeeze even more. Obviously, tax and benefits play a part in people's income too. It looks bleak now, but the Bank of England forecasts that by next year, pay packets should start to pick up again. Steph McGovern, BBC News, Huddersfield.
Part of our reality check series. Time now for the sport. Let's join Catherine Downs at the BBC Sports Centre. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Michelle. Good evening. Lewis Hamilton has won the Spanish Grand Prix, edged out at the start. He fought back to overtake Sebastian Vettel, who now has just a 6-point lead over Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. Joe Linsky was watching.
Formula One thrives on the spectacular. In Barcelona, a battle for the championship is taking shape. Over Lewis Hamilton's shoulder, Sebastian Vettel is in pursuit. The German has set the pace so far this season. Here too, an early charge got his Ferrari in front. While Vettel's start was perfect, his teammate couldn't dodge the traffic. Kimi Raikkonen's bump with Max Verstappen saw both their races end in tears. And with Vettel's lead over Hamilton opening up, he too was getting desperate.
I don't think I can close the gap with this tyre, guys.
But the Britain's opportunity came with the safety car. With the race held up, Hamilton took a pit stop, so when Vettel emerged, he had company. This was the spectacle they'd hoped for. In this sport, brilliance often comes through bravery. Hamilton's moment came with one lunge for the front. Points from pole edge him closer to the top, but in the battle for the title, this victory means so much more. Joe Linsky, BBC News.
Now, Match of the Day 2 follows later on BBC One, so if you don't want to know today's Premier League news, it's time to look away. And Hull City have been relegated from the Premier League after a day of contrasting emotions at Selhurst Park. A 4-0 thrashing at the hands of Crystal Palace means Hull join Middlesbrough and Sunderland in the Championship next season, but the result guaranteed that Palace will remain in the top flight. It was 4-0 between Liverpool and West Ham too. The win moves Liverpool back up to third and a step closer to finishing in the Champions League places. And Tottenham ended their 118 years at White Hart Lane on a high. They beat Manchester United 2-1 to round off an unbeaten season at their home stadium. They'll play at Wembley while their new ground is being built. British hopes of winning the Giro d'Italia could well be over after a dramatic crash on today's stage. Geraint Thomas and Adam Yates were in second and third overall, but they were caught up in this, a collision with a police motorbike at the side of the road. They're now more than 5 minutes behind the race leader. And double Olympic champion Nick Skelton and his horse Big Star both retired from show jumping today. The pair won individual gold in Rio to add to Skelton's team gold from the London Games in 2012. And that's all the sport, Michelle.
Catherine, thank you very much. Is there a new kind of politics emerging in Britain beyond the familiar coloured rosettes we see at election time? The vote to leave the EU cut across the usual political lines, and elsewhere, established parties are facing challenges. In the first of a series on the changing face of UK politics, our home editor Mark Easton has been to Liverpool and to Sunderland to examine the old left-right divide.
Sunderland used to be shipbuilder to the world. A new vessel slipped into the water here every 9 days at one time. But the globalisation that created this proud city is now seen by many locals as a threat.
They're selling us down the river. I'm passionate about Sunderland. Now I'm passionate about the northeast. We haven't got any more.
The Welcome Tavern would once have been packed with merchants and sailors buying beer with the profits of international trade. But now custom comes from the struggling neighbourhood just beyond its door.
A few years ago, on the river, you would see nothing but ships. Fishing boats, what you could walk across the river on, there was that many. Now, you look at it, gone, nothing.
We've got to start thinking about ourselves more. This part of the country's just being left behind, forgotten about. And I'm not a European, I never will be. I don't want to be. I want to be a proud Englishman.
It's your identity. You've got to protect your identity.
And you feel that's under threat by globalisation?
It's most certainly it is.
Throughout the world, we've seen the Trumps coming up, and we see it in France. There's a movement that's moving away from, you know, just keep them under. We have to look after our own.
Traditional politics is taking a battering, from the views of the welcome in here in Sunderland to Brexit to Trump, the new French president. Across the Western world, party allegiances are breaking down. It's no longer about left or right so much as globalism versus nationalism. Many people in this city feel that Sunderland is losing its foothold in the world, that its destiny is decided beyond reach in Westminster, in Brussels, or a boardroom in Yokohama.
I feel as if everything's much, much further away for us.
But the world is a bigger world, isn't it?
Because
of the internet and because of all the modern technology.
They had mining communities, you had the shipbuilders, you had shipbuilding communities. There was all these big communities that would all pull together because everybody knew each other. Everybody had gone to school together. All the mines knew each other.
Well, I suppose you had the unions.
The unions were a huge thing, whereas unions are fragmented now. Nobody's really turning to the unions.
They don't have the power, though, do they? Unions don't have the power that they used to have.
We have no power. We have our vote, but that is where it starts and stops.
Like the people of Wearside, voters on Merseyside have backed Labour for generations. But the outlook here is different. In this part of Liverpool, they don't see globalisation as a threat, but an opportunity. The huge cargo ships busy loading and unloading at the port are a reminder of the days when the city was richer than London. Prosperity built on immigration and international trade is central to Liverpool's story. Unlike Labour Sunderland, where most people voted to leave the EU, a majority in Labour Liverpool voted to remain. Tell me about this beer.
It's not a left-wing beer, it's not a right-wing beer, it's about giving the people of Liverpool a voice.
Politics has been very kind of categorised. It's red, it's blue, it's yellow, purple, whatever now. But it's broken up now. There isn't categories anymore.
Liverpool is a defiant, resilient city, and from its grassroots, a new pro-globalisation movement has just started to bubble up.
We're all global people in this city. We're all daughters of the city, sons of the city, but daughters of immigrants, sons of immigrants.
I'm immensely proud of being British. I serve my country in uniform, but yes, I do feel like a citizen of the world as well.
There are different outlooks in Liverpool and in Sunderland, of course, but the political undercurrents are shifting as a new politics starts to emerge. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Stars of the small screen gathered this evening in London for the annual BAFTA Television Awards. Among those honoured was Joanna Lumley, awarded the BAFTA Fellowship in recognition of her work over 4 decades. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba was there. His report contains flash photography.
On the red carpet, many of TV's best-known faces for a ceremony potentially more significant than many before it.
5 years ago, programmes on online-only channels couldn't be entered. This year, after a series of rule changes, they're not only eligible, but streaming service Netflix's royal drama The Crown is leading the nominations. On the night, the royal drama starring Claire Foy as the young Queen went home empty-handed. And in a more traditionally feeling result, the BBC dominated, winning more than 3/4 of the awards, including 2 BAFTAs for
Happy Valley.
I thought I got through to him. I thought he was stepping down.
The Yorkshire set crime drama won Best Drama Series and Best Actress for Sarah Lancashire, who paid tribute to one of her fellow nominees.
Claire Foy, you have given me the best 10 hours under a duvet that I've ever had.
The drama Damilola, Our Loved Boy, also won 2 BAFTAs, including Best Supporting Actress for Wunmi Mosaku.
Baba, we pray for justice for Damilola.
And there were a couple of awards, including Must See Moment for Planet Earth 2's Snakes vs Iguana Chase. The miniseries award went to Channel 4's National Treasure, about a comedian accused of historic crimes. The BBC's Victoria Derbyshire programme won the News Award, and actress Joanna Lumley received a standing ovation from the audience as she was presented with BAFTA's highest accolade, the Fellowship. Lisa Mzimba, BBC News at the BAFTAs.
That's all from us. Stay with us though on BBC One. It's time for the news wherever you are. Good night.